If you've never been called in for jury duty, let me paint the picture. Fluorescent lights, plastic chairs that dig into your back, the smell of stale coffee and old paper, and about 50 people sitting around in awkward silence, either pretending to read or scrolling through their phones, all silently wondering the same thing. How do I get out of this? That's where I was that morning, in the downtown courthouse, on the 5th floor with a bunch of strangers. I had brought a book I wasn't actually reading, and a giant coffee I'd regret later. I wasn't expecting anything but boredom, and maybe a parking ticket if things ran long. Then he walked in. I noticed him right away, not because he was flashy or loud, but because of how out of place he looked in that room. Tall, clean-shaven, maybe late 30s or early 40s, with sharp features and a quiet confidence. He had this salt and pepper hair that actually looked good, like he didn't dye it out of shame but wore it like he earned every strand. He took a seat 2 rows ahead of me, opened a notebook and started writing, not scrolling his phone, not people watching, just writing like he wasn't here by accident. I tried not to stare. I really did. Eventually they called out names for the first panel, and of course, mine was one of them, along with his. We were herded like cattle down a narrow hallway and into a courtroom with wood paneling and creaky pews that made everyone feel like they were in trouble, even though we were just potential jurors. The judge explained the case. It was a civil matter, nothing dramatic. Still, the lawyers asked their questions, tried to read our faces, eliminate the ones who looked too smart or too checked out. I was trying to focus, but then he spoke. They asked him about his job. He was a high school teacher, English. His voice was calm, patient, the kind of voice that made you want to listen. He answered questions like he'd done it 100 times, like he had nothing to hide and didn't need to impress anyone. I felt weirdly self-conscious when they got to me. I'm in marketing. My job sounded stupid and hollow after I teach kids how to write and think for themselves. When they finally picked the 12 of us, I was half hoping he'd be on there too. He was, and they made him Foreman. I tried to act normal, like I wasn't intrigued by a complete stranger who had literally just said 10 words in the courtroom. But there was something about him that made the air feel different when he was around. As we filed into the deliberation room for the first time, he looked right at me and smiled. Nothing over the top. Just this calm, kind expression, like he already knew me a little. And for some reason I can't fully explain, I smiled back. The thing about jury duty is, nobody tells you how strangely intimate it becomes. You go in thinking it's going to be a tedious civic obligation, maybe a few days max. But once you're on a panel, you're basically trapped with 11 strangers, 5 days a week, inside this weird little bubble of fluorescent lights, water coolers, and vending machine coffee. And then there's him. His name was Mark. I found that out during a 15-minute break on day 2. We were lingering around the hallway by the windows. The court had these big panes of glass that overlooked a dull city street. Buses pulling in, people on lunch breaks, that kind of view. I was leaning against the windowsill, sipping bag coffee, trying to look casual, and he walked up beside me like it wasn't a big deal. "This coffee's awful, right?" he said, smiling over his cup. I laughed. "I've tasted worse." He raised an eyebrow. "Where?" "I used to work at a PR agency that shared a kitchen with a tech startup. They had some kind of experimental bean thing going on. It tasted like dirt filtered through a sock." He actually laughed, a full, unguarded kind of laugh, and it made my chest tighten in the weirdest way. "I'm Mark, by the way," he said, offering his hand. "Eli," we shook. His hand was warm and firm, and for a second longer than necessary, he didn't let go. It was subtle, but it registered. I noticed. I thought I might be imagining things. Maybe he was just friendly. Maybe he smiled like that at everyone. But then we started talking again during the next break, and the one after that. I noticed how he always ended up sitting across from me during deliberations, or near me during lunch. He had this calm, thoughtful energy. He didn't talk just to talk, but when he did, people listened. He always looked right at me when he spoke, like he was checking to see if I agreed, like my opinion mattered more. By day 3, the others were already making alliances. Susan, the retired nurse, was clearly not going to budge. Kevin, the financial analyst, wanted the facts down to the decimal point. The case itself wasn't even that interesting. It involved a small business owner suing their former partner over breach of contract. Not exactly law and order material. But I kept showing up, half listening to testimony, half watching Mark. The way he'd run his thumb along the paper while taking notes. The way his tie was always slightly loosened by noon. The small smile he gave when something amused him, and he didn't want anyone else to notice. One afternoon, after a particularly long and dull witness testimony, we ended up alone again by the windows. He leaned close, his voice low. You ever feel like you're stuck in someone else's movie? I looked at him, unsure what he meant. He went on, this isn't your story. You're just the guy in the background, watching it unfold. I laughed softly, surprised by how familiar that sounded. You mean like jury duty? He smiled. No, like life. There was a beat of silence between us, a slow inhale. I looked out the window at the people walking below and realized I didn't know how to respond. Not really. Because, yes, I had felt that way. More than I like to admit. Yeah, I said finally. All the time. His eyes stayed on me for a second longer than they should have. Like he was trying to see something just under my skin. Then the bailiff called us back in. Back in the room, the foreman, Mark, read from his notes, guiding us gently through the facts. People deferred to him quickly. He had that kind of presence, calm and respectful without being bossy. But I noticed how he looked at me when someone disagreed, like he was checking my face for backup, like I was the only person in the room who might be on his wavelength. I started staying a little later than I had to, lingering in the hallway after we were dismissed. And so did he. Going anywhere after this? He asked one afternoon, not looking at me, just sipping from his coffee cup again, his eyes watching the traffic outside. Probably just heading home, I said, trying to sound casual. He nodded, then paused. You live nearby? West Side? You? He turned toward me, then smiled, but there was something behind it. Hesitation, maybe. A calculation. Just a few blocks from here. East Market. It hit me then, out of nowhere. I wanted to walk there with him. I wanted to see what his apartment looked like, what books he kept by his bed, what coffee he actually drank when it wasn't from a vending machine. It was a weird thought. Fast. Unexpected. But real. He didn't ask me to go with him. Not yet. He just glanced at his watch, said, "See you tomorrow," and left with that same calm step. The soft click of his shoes echoing in the hallway. But he turned back once, right before the stairwell. And I swear he smiled like he knew what I'd been thinking. Like he'd been thinking it too. The next morning I woke up early. Not because I had to. Jury duty doesn't even start until mid-morning, but because I couldn't sleep. I'd been replaying the hallway conversation with Mark in my head over and over. The way he smiled, the tone of his voice when he asked if I lived nearby, that casual, slightly guarded curiosity in his eyes. I'd been on enough dates, hell, I'd had enough flings to recognize the shape of interest. But this was different. It was slower, quieter, and maybe because of that, it felt more dangerous. It didn't help that I barely knew anything about him. I didn't know if he was gay, or bi, or just kind, or if I was projecting all of this onto a man who'd simply smiled at me more than once in a courthouse hallway. Still, I found myself taking extra time getting dressed. I switched shirts twice, landed on something simple, a gray tee under a black overshirt. Casual but decent. I told myself it wasn't for him, but it was. We were nearly done with the case. The closing arguments were scheduled for that day, and there was this quiet electricity in the deliberation room like everyone knew the finish line was close. Even the lawyers looked looser, like they were just playing out their final moves. Mark sat at the head of the long table, as always, but when I came in and took my usual spot across from him, something shifted. Our eyes met, and for the briefest moment, we didn't look away. He gave the tiniest nod, and I smiled, without thinking, without pretending not to care. The closing arguments were dry. I half listened. Something about breach of fiduciary duty, about evidence versus intent. But I wasn't paying full attention. I kept sneaking glances at Mark, wondering what was going on in his head. At lunch, I stayed in the courthouse cafe instead of wandering off. The food was awful, but I didn't care. I was hoping he'd stay too. He did. We sat across from each other at a small round table with bad sandwiches and worse coffee. There was something unspoken between us that hadn't been there before, at least not this clearly. A tension that wasn't awkward, just present. He looked up from his sandwich. "You always this quiet when you're thinking?" I smirked. "You've only known me for 4 days." "Still," he said, "I notice things." My heart did this weird skip. "What else have you noticed?" He wiped his hands with a napkin, then leaned back a little, tilting his head. "You're the only one on this jury who actually pays attention. And you're the only one who never interrupts. It's like you listen more than you talk." "That a compliment?" "Depends," he said. "Do you want it to be?" I couldn't help it. I laughed, but there was a heat rising in my face I couldn't shake. Before I could answer, one of the other jurors wandered over and sat down, killing the moment. Mark shifted back into his neutral posture, smiling politely, like he'd flipped a switch. I missed the quiet between us immediately. When we returned to the deliberation room, the mood had shifted. The judge gave us instructions. The bailiff took the evidence box out. And suddenly, it was real. We were going to deliberate. Mark stepped into his role easily. He was thoughtful, respectful, balanced. He never pushed too hard, but he kept things moving. And he always glanced at me when someone said something dramatic, like we were silently sharing a reaction. When people got emotional, he stayed calm. When they got loud, he listened. And every time he looked my way, something in my chest tightened. After a couple hours, we took a short break again. I walked the hallway just to clear my head. When I came back, Mark was standing alone by the far windows, away from the group, sipping coffee and staring down at the street. I joined him without saying anything. We stood there for a while, just side by side, watching cars crawl through downtown traffic. Then he said, quietly, "You okay?" I nodded, not looking at him. "Yeah, just thinking." He took a sip. "You do that a lot." Then he turned to me. His eyes weren't teasing now. They were direct, steady, like he wanted to say something else but wasn't sure if it was okay. I faced him. My pulse was doing this slow, thudding beat behind my ears. "You gonna tell me what you're thinking?" "I'm thinking," he said carefully, "that I don't usually feel like this. Not during jury duty. Not around strangers." My stomach flipped. There it was. He exhaled through his nose. "And I don't know what you're doing to me, Eli. But it's been happening since day one." I didn't say anything for a second. I didn't know how to. My throat was suddenly dry. He looked down, maybe regretting it, maybe trying to backtrack. But I reached out lightly and touched his arm. "I feel it too," I said. "I've been trying to pretend I didn't, but yeah, I feel it." He looked up, and for the first time since I met him, he didn't smile. He just stared, something vulnerable in his eyes. "Good," he said finally. "At least I'm not crazy." The bailiff called for us again. Our moment was over. But it wasn't. Not really. Something had shifted. Something between us had broken open. And neither of us tried to close it again. After that conversation by the window, it was like everything in the room changed. Or maybe it was just me. Mark and I didn't sit closer. We didn't speak more than we needed to. But the air between us had shifted, like a low-frequency buzz that only we could hear. Every glance felt heavier. Every pause between words had meaning. But we still had a job to do. Deliberations weren't dramatic. Exactly. But they had their moments. A few jurors pushed back on some of the evidence. Some thought the plaintiff exaggerated damages. Others felt the defendant was careless. Mark navigated all of it calmly, like a captain steering us through stormy waters. Every time things got heated, he brought it back to the facts. And when he asked for votes, he always looked at me last. Maybe I was reading into that, but I don't think I was. We reached a unanimous verdict by late afternoon. It felt anticlimactic after everything. No big speech, no final showdown, just a quiet agreement, some relieved nodding, and the sense that this strange little chapter of life was ending. Quickly. Abruptly. I didn't want it to end yet. The bailiff took us back into the courtroom, where the judge thanked us for our service and read the verdict out loud. The plaintiff won, but not the full amount they were asking for. A fair middle ground. Afterward, there was some polite chatter in the hallway as people collected their things. I watched a few jurors exchange numbers, say they'd keep in touch, all the things people say when they've shared a room but not a life. Mark lingered. I did too. People slowly trickled out. I grabbed my bag and stood there by the window again, not pretending this time, not hiding the way I was watching him. He walked over, calm as ever, but there was something tentative in his steps now, less sure, like he was nervous. We stood face to face again, the hallway now nearly empty. "So," he started. I raised an eyebrow. "So," he smiled, but it was soft. "I feel like we should have had a few more days." I nodded. "Feels like something's getting cut short." He looked down at the floor, then back up at me. "I don't normally. I've never actually." I waited. Then he exhaled, shook his head like he was annoyed with himself, and said, "Do you want to get a drink?" I didn't even hesitate. "Yeah, I do." There was this pause after I said it, just a second or two. But in that pause, something happened. Like all the unspoken tension between us finally settled. And when he smiled again, it wasn't nervous, it was real. "Cool," he said. "There's a place not far from here. Quiet, decent drinks. You free now?" I looked at the time. "Yeah, let's go." We didn't walk close, not at first. Downtown was still busy with people leaving work, streaming into bars or heading to the train. But once we were a few blocks away from the courthouse, he walked a little nearer. Close enough that our arms almost brushed. The bar he chose was one of those narrow, dimly lit places with low booths and soft music. No sports on TV. No loud crowds. Just the kind of place people go to talk. He ordered an old-fashioned, I got a beer. We took a booth near the back. The light above our table was a soft amber that made the whole thing feel a little surreal, like we were in a scene we weren't supposed to be in. We made small talk at first, about the case, about the weirdest juror, Susan obviously, about the awful coffee, but after the second round we stopped pretending. He leaned forward, arms folded on the table. "So, I wasn't imagining it, right? That thing between us?" I met his eyes. "No, you weren't." He nodded slowly, like hearing it aloud gave him permission to admit what he'd been thinking. "I haven't done this in a long time," he said. "Not since college." "What? Jury duty?" He chuckled. "No, this. The thing where I get nervous about someone. Where I wonder if I'm reading too much into every smile, every look." "I've been doing that all week," I admitted. He stared at me for a second like he was memorizing my face. "You've got this calm thing about you. You seem like someone who doesn't get fazed easily. You'd be surprised." He nodded slowly, then said something that made my chest tighten. "I almost didn't say anything. I figured you were probably straight." I blinked. "What made you think that?" He shrugged. "The way you dress, the way you carry yourself. It's dumb, I know that. But I've been wrong before." "Well, I'm not straight," I said quietly. "Haven't been for a while." There was a beat. Then he smiled. Not like he was relieved, not like he'd won something, but like the air between us had finally cleared. "Good," he said. "We had one more round. Neither of us got drunk. We just sat there in that quiet booth, talking about everything and nothing, like we'd known each other longer than a week." Eventually he looked at his watch and said, "I should probably head back." I hesitated. Yeah, same. But I didn't want to go. And when he stood up, he didn't walk away immediately. He waited, like he was giving me a chance to say something. So I did. "I live 10 minutes from here." He looked at me. "You inviting me?" I nodded, not breaking eye contact. "If you want." He didn't answer. He just took a step closer. And suddenly, the air between us wasn't just charged. It was electric. The walk to my place was quiet, but not awkward. There was something calm about it, like we both knew what was happening but didn't feel the need to rush or explain it. Mark walked just behind me at first, then beside me, hands in his pockets, occasionally brushing against mine as we crossed intersections or stepped around late commuters. It was one of those early spring nights where the air was just cool enough to notice, but not uncomfortable. The city had that muted buzz of people heading home, restaurants filling up, lights flickering on in high-rises. And in the middle of it, the two of us walked like we were in our own little tunnel of stillness. I didn't speak much. I was afraid that if I said the wrong thing, I'd break whatever fragile thread we were following. Mark didn't seem in a hurry to fill the silence either. Every now and then, he'd glance over at me with this faint smile, and it made my chest feel tight. When we reached my building, I hesitated before unlocking the door. I looked at him, unsure if this was the part where he'd second-guess himself. He didn't. He just nodded once, slowly, and followed me in. The elevator ride was the quietest part of all. We stood shoulder to shoulder, staring at the numbers blinking above the door. My floor. My apartment, my hands slightly shaking as I unlocked the door and let him inside. The place wasn't much, just a one-bedroom with a narrow kitchen and a couch that doubled as a laundry folding station. I hadn't cleaned in anticipation of this. Hell, I hadn't even believed it would happen. But when he walked in, he didn't look around like he was judging anything. He stepped inside like he'd been here before, like it wasn't weird at all. I watched as he looked around briefly, then turned back to face me. He took a breath like he was about to speak. I beat him to it. "Want water or something?" He smirked. "That your move?" I laughed, nervous. It's my polite deflection. He stepped closer. "You don't need to deflect." I froze, not in fear, but in that way your body does when it knows something important is about to happen. He reached up, touched the side of my face with his hand. His thumb rested just near the edge of my jaw. His eyes searched mine, slow and deliberate, like he was making absolutely sure I was okay. And I was. God, I was. Then he kissed me. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't sloppy or desperate. It was slow, intentional, warm. His lips were soft and certain. The kind of kiss that doesn't ask for permission, because it already knows the answer. I kissed him back, leaning into him, my hands finding his waist without thought. We stayed like that for a long time, just kissing, exploring the space between nerves and need. When we finally broke apart, he rested his forehead against mine. "You okay?" he whispered. "Yeah," I said, my voice low. "Good." We moved to the couch, not out of strategy, but because standing suddenly felt unnecessary. He sat down beside me, close enough that our legs touched. We didn't start kissing again right away. We just sat there, side by side, the tension between us shifting into something softer. He looked around my place again. "You live here alone?" "Yeah," he nodded. "Quiet?" "Usually. Except when the neighbor's kid decides to practice drums at midnight." He smiled, then looked at me again. His hand rested on my knee now, warm and steady. "I don't usually do this," I raised an eyebrow. "Come home with strangers?" "Let someone in like this. Let it happen this fast." I exhaled. "Neither do I." He leaned in again, his lips brushing mine. "It doesn't feel fast?" "No," I whispered. "It doesn't." And then it happened. The slow lean back, the way his hand slid behind my head, guiding me down onto the couch with him. Our bodies moved without instruction, mouths reconnecting, fingers sliding under fabric, breath hitching as skin met skin. It wasn't about chillin', not right away. It was about presence, about closeness, about the way he gripped my shoulder while I kissed his neck, or the quiet exhale when my hand brushed under his shirt and found the warmth of his side. We didn't rush. We didn't even talk. We just let the moment stretch and deepen, like we were learning each other one breath at a time. Eventually, when we were tangled up on the couch, shirts off, chests pressed together, my head resting in the crook of his neck, he spoke again. I forgot what this felt like. I didn't ask what he meant. I just nodded against his skin. Me too. He didn't spend the night. He could have. I wanted him to. But after a while, he stood, kissed me again, and said, "I want to see you again, but I need to go." "Okay," I said, and meant it. "Soon?" He smiled, buttoning his shirt. Very. He left without drama. No promises, no over-explaining, just that same quiet confidence I'd seen on the first day in the courtroom. After he left, I sat on the couch for a long time, the room still smelling faintly like his cologne. I stared at the door, heart thudding, brain reeling. I wasn't sure what I'd just started, but I knew I didn't want it to end. The next morning felt strange. Not in a bad way, just shifted. I woke up early, earlier than usual for a weekend. The apartment was quiet, the kind of quiet that made you notice the little things. How soft the couch cushions still felt under my back, how the air smelled faintly of the whiskey we'd sipped, and his skin. I sat there for a moment before getting up, stretching in the soft morning light leaking in through the blinds. I hadn't slept much. I hadn't wanted to. My brain kept replaying every moment from the night before. His voice, the way he'd looked at me, how his hand had held the side of my face like he'd done it before in some other life. I checked my phone. Nothing from Mark, but it hadn't even been 10 hours since he left. Still, something in me buzzed with uncertainty. I went about my morning like usual. Coffee, a little toast, half scrolling through news I didn't care about. But I kept pausing, glancing at my phone, wondering if he'd say something first, or if I should. I thought about the moment just before he walked out last night, how he'd kissed me slowly, deeply, like he meant it. Not rushed, not apologetic. It hadn't felt like a one-off, even though he hadn't stayed. He'd looked back at me once, right before the elevator doors closed. That look had carried something in it, like a promise. By noon, I gave in and texted him. Me. "Hey, hope you got home safe." I stared at the message for too long before hitting send. Immediately regretted how casual it sounded. Too short, too neutral, but I didn't want to scare him off. 10 minutes passed. Nothing. Then 20. At 32 minutes, he responded. "Mark, I did. Sorry for the slow reply. Slept in harder than I meant to." I smiled. It was easy. Natural. Not overthought. Mark, again. Last night was... Yeah. I'm still kind of processing. I read that line a few times. I understood what he meant. I was processing too. Me. Same here. But in a good way, I think. I didn't expect the typing bubbles to pop up immediately, but they did. Mark. Definitely in a good way. I keep thinking about it. I felt my stomach flip. Mark. You free later? That was the moment my shoulders dropped, and all the air I didn't realize I'd been holding finally left me. Me. Yeah. Want to come over again? Or meet somewhere? He responded almost instantly. Mark. Come over. If that's okay. Me. Absolutely. He showed up that afternoon around 4. This time, I was ready. The place was cleaner. I'd showered, shaved, put on real pants for once. When I opened the door, he was standing there in a light denim jacket, black tee underneath, his hair still damp like he'd also wanted to feel fresh before seeing me. "Hey," he said, smiling. "Hey," I echoed, stepping aside. The moment he stepped in, I sighed. This slight nervousness in his shoulders, the way he glanced around like he was seeing everything more clearly now. I didn't go in for a hug, didn't try to kiss him right away. I just asked if he wanted coffee. He said yes. We sat at the kitchen counter, both holding mugs, the conversation slower this time. Not guarded, just more real. He told me about his job, how he taught American Lit, and always ended the year with The Great Gatsby, even though half his students hated it. How he lived alone, too. about 10 minutes farther from downtown than I'd thought. How we hadn't dated in a while. Years, actually. Why? I asked gently. He looked into his cup like it held the answer. I think I just stopped expecting things to feel right. You mean relationships? Yeah, I tried a couple serious ones in my 20s. But either they didn't want what I wanted, or I wasn't ready to give it. He shrugged. Then I got comfortable being alone. Too comfortable. I nodded slowly. I get that. What about you? Same story, just a different job title, I said with a weak smile. A few half things that never became whole. Some nights alone. Some flings. But mostly just me. He looked at me again, and his expression softened. This doesn't feel like one of those half things, he said. No, I agreed. It doesn't. Then he reached across the counter and placed his hand on mine. And just like that, the air shifted again. We spent the next few hours on the couch. No kissing, not yet. Just leaning into each other, arms grazing, conversation wandering. At one point, I rested my head on his shoulder, and he let his head tilt slightly against mine. When the sky started dimming, he looked at the clock. I should probably head out soon. I didn't ask him to stay. I didn't need to. Because just before he stood up, he said, I want to see you again. Not just here, I mean out. Like a real thing. A real date? I asked. Yeah, he said, smiling. You free Thursday? I'll make sure I am. He kissed me then. Just once, but it was enough. And when he left this time, I didn't feel anxious. I felt certain. Thursday arrived like a slow build-up. I'd been thinking about it since Sunday, replaying everything Mark said, the way his hand had lingered on mine, how his body felt next to me on the couch. It had been years since I felt this kind of anticipation about someone, even longer since I let myself hope. He texted me mid-morning. Mark, still on for tonight? Me. Absolutely. Where should I meet you? Mark, there's this little place in Franklin Square. Italian, not too loud. You'll like it. Me. I like it already. He sent the address, along with don't overthink your outfit, followed by a winking emoji that I found way too charming. Still, I absolutely overthought my outfit. I landed on dark jeans, boots, and a fitted button-down. Clean, understated, slightly nicer than casual. I told myself it was about feeling confident, not about him. But of course it was about him. I got there 5 minutes early. He was already at the bar, looking relaxed in a navy sweater and black slacks, a glass of red wine in his hand. He turned when I walked in and smiled like he'd been waiting hours. Hey, he said, standing up. Hey, I echoed. Again. That word was becoming a ritual with us. He gave me a one-armed hug, just brief enough to be casual, but just long enough that I felt the heat of his body, and the way his hand landed right at my lower back. We got a table near the window. Soft lighting, a quiet booth, low background music, the kind of atmosphere where time slips away unnoticed. We started with food, pasta, bread, a bottle of wine, and let the conversation flow. It wasn't stiff or rehearsed. We talked about normal things. Favorite books, songs we never skip, movies we secretly loved, his students and their obsession with TikTok, my coworkers and their obsession with team building. At one point, he looked at me over his glass and said, You're easier to talk to than I expected. Why's that? He shrugged. I thought you'd be guarded. I was, I admitted. For a while? What changed? I looked at him, and it wasn't even a dramatic moment. It just felt obvious. You. That stopped him. Not in a dramatic way. Just a pause, a soft blink like he didn't quite know how to take that in. But then he nodded, slowly. Same here. We left the restaurant sometime past 9, full but not tired, warm from the wine, the street cooler now with that late spring breeze that made everything feel cleaner. The city buzzed around us, people rushing past, neon lights blinking, smells of food and asphalt in the air. He walked close, not touching, but closer than casual. When we got to the corner where we'd have to split, his train one way, my place the other, we both paused. You want to come back? I asked, voice lower. "I do," he said. "But not tonight," I blinked. Not because I was disappointed, though, yeah, I kind of was, but because I didn't expect it. He saw the confusion in my face and quickly added, I like this pace. I don't want to burn it out." That hit me harder than if he'd just said yes. "Okay," I said. "I get that." He reached for my hand then, just briefly, and squeezed it. "I'll call you tomorrow?" "Please do." Then he leaned in, kissed me right there on the sidewalk. No hesitation, no worrying about who might see. His lips were warm, steady, and full of that same quiet certainty he'd carried since the courtroom. It wasn't a "see you later" kiss. It was a "we're doing this" kiss. And I stood there long after he walked away, heart pounding like I was 19 again, watching his silhouette disappear into the night. We settled into something that wasn't quite a relationship yet, but wasn't not one either. Over the next few weeks, we saw each other more than we didn't. A dinner here, a movie night there, slow mornings with coffee and shared glances across my kitchen counter. Sometimes we stayed in, sometimes we walked through the park, not holding hands but brushing elbows more than once. We didn't make a big show of it. Neither of us was the type to broadcast. But it felt real, quietly, steadily real. Mark was exactly who I'd thought he was. Thoughtful, warm, funny in this dry, understated way. He'd send me songs in the middle of the day. He'd remember tiny things I said in passing and bring them up weeks later, like mental souvenirs. He wasn't dramatic. He didn't chase attention. And yet, somehow, every time I looked at him, he had mine completely. But there was a hesitation in both of us. Something we didn't say. It came to a head one night in early June, maybe a month after our first date. We were lying on my bed, fully dressed, heads on opposite ends, like kids at a sleepover. He had one hand on his chest, eyes on the ceiling. Out of nowhere, he said, "What are we doing?" I turned my head to look at him. "You mean tonight?" "No," he said softly. "Us." I stayed quiet for a few seconds. Then, "You want the honest answer?" "Please." "I think we're figuring it out. But yeah, I'm into this. Into you." He nodded. "Good. But," I added, "that's not really what you're asking, is it?" He turned his head to look at me. "No, I guess I'm asking if this is real for you, if you're actually open to it going somewhere." I sat up slowly, back against the headboard. I didn't think I was. Not when jury duty started. I wasn't even looking. He smirked. Neither was I. "But then," I continued, "you walked in. And I felt something that didn't make sense yet, but it grew, every day." Mark sat up too now, crossing his legs. "I've been careful, for years, about who I let close, about who I let see this side of me. It's just easier that way." "I get that." He looked down at his hands. "But I don't want to be careful with you." The room was quiet for a moment. My chest ached in the best possible way. "Then don't be," I said. "I'm not." He looked at me, and in his eyes I saw it. That same certainty he carried in the courtroom, the way he led without pushing, the quiet strength that had pulled me in from day one. "I want this," he said. "Whatever it turns into." I smiled. "Me too." We didn't have to define it that night. We didn't set boundaries or rules, but we made a decision. A quiet one, sealed by a kiss and the way our bodies moved closer without hesitation. From that night on, things shifted. He started leaving a toothbrush in my bathroom. I learned how he liked his eggs. He met my sister at a gallery opening, and she whispered to me afterward, "Don't screw this one up." We weren't dramatic. We didn't fall into bed every night with fireworks, but we shared Sunday mornings. We argued about stupid things like thermostat settings and which pizza place was better. We learned to sit in silence together and not feel the need to fill it. We built something. Slowly. Deliberately. And every now and then, one of us would say, usually half joking, "Can you believe this started with jury duty?" But the truth is, yeah, I could believe it, because in a room full of strangers, In a situation no one wants to be in, I found someone who saw me clearly, who listened, who reached across the silence. He was the foreman. But somehow, he followed me too.